Welcome to Road of Echoes today in Episode 9, Shawnee Forest Whispers, Voices from the Deep Woods. We begin Part 3 in the quiet, shadowed bend of Dead Man's Hollow, where CCC workers uncovered a lone grave in 1930. The forest was nearly untouched then, and the discovery of a skeleton and a handful of personal belongings raised more questions than answers. In Episode 2, we followed the early settlers who pushed into this rugged country, carving homesteads along the ridgelines and valleys. Their stories of hardship, isolation, and sudden disappearances echo into this moment, because whoever lay buried here may have been one of them. Standing in Dead Man's Hollow today, the air still feels heavy with the mystery of who this traveler was, how he died, and why the woods kept his secret for more than a century. Let's begin. Somewhere in the forest, near Twin Creek, there is a hollow that the locals avoided for years before anyone could fully explain why. They called it Dead Man Hollow. They said they heard screaming there, not animal sounds, but something that sounded in the wrong light and the wrong hour, like a human voice from somewhere that had no human in it. In the 1930s, a crew of young men came into the hollow to work the land, and they found a skeleton. They reburied it with a hand-carved marker, HT Aug 13, 1824, AD, Dead M, Dead Man. The initials HT have never been matched to a name. The grave was later washed away by flooding. The hollow kept its reputation. This is a story about people who came to this forest to build something that would last, and about the question of what the land was already holding when they arrived. By 1922, the forests that had once covered the hill country of Adams and Scioto counties had been largely stripped. The farms the settlers had carved from the ridges were failing or already abandoned. Ohio had purchased the cut-over land, 20,000 acres of it, and named it the Theodore Roosevelt Game Preserve. The idea was to bring it back. What no one had fully accounted for was what bringing it back would cost, and who would do the work. When the Great Depression arrived after 1929, it fell with particular weight on southern Ohio. Portsmouth, the Scioto County seat, had been built on industry, shoe factories, steel mills, brick plants, and when those industries contracted, the city contracted with them. In the hill country, where poverty had never been far away, the Depression was not a new crisis, but an intensification of a long one. Men who had left the hollows for factory work found themselves without wages, without prospects, and in many cases without food. The land that their grandfathers had cleared and exhausted and abandoned had outlasted the city jobs that replaced it. It was waiting. Men who had left the hollows for factory work found themselves without wages, without prospects, and in many cases without food. The land that their grandfathers had cleared and exhausted and abandoned had outlasted the city jobs that replaced it. It was waiting. In March of 1933, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed the Emergency Conservation Work Act, creating the program that would become known as the Civilian Conservation Corps. The bargain was straightforward. Young, unemployed men would receive housing, food, clothing, medical care, and $30 a month, $25 of which was sent directly home to their families in exchange for conservation work on the nation's public lands. Over its 9 years, the CCC would employ more than 3 million men, plant 3 billion trees, build 97,000 miles of fire roads, and construct thousands of bridges, dams, and public buildings. It remains the largest peacetime mobilization of labor in American history. In the spring and summer of 1933, the first CCC companies arrived in Shawnee State Forest. They came by truck in uniform, organized along military lines, each company of approximately 200 men commanded by Army officers, with civilian foresters directing the work. 4 camps were established in the forest. All four were segregated, all black companies, a reflection of the racial policies that governed the New Deal from its earliest days. The young men who came to Shawnee to build a forest were African American, drawn primarily from the cities of Ohio. They would work this land for nearly a decade. The forest they built is the one that stands today. The men of the Shawnee CCC camps came largely from Columbus, Cincinnati, Cleveland, and Portsmouth. Many were teenagers. Some had never left the city before. They arrived in hill country that was, in many ways, as foreign to them as it had been to the first European settlers a century and a half earlier. They were young, and in many cases they were hungry. The average enrollee at Camp Shawnee No. 2 gained 20 pounds in his first months of service, significantly more than the national CCC average. The forest was feeding them in ways the city had not. In exchange, they would feed the forest. The Mud Lick Road, built entirely by the men of Company 1520, is documented in a November 1933 photograph showing a finished gravel surface cutting through recovering forest. 100 miles of roads like this one were built across Shawnee by CCC labor. Every car that enters the forest today drives on their work. Camp Adams sat in the Churn Creek Valley, a site that had seen human habitation for generations, where the Upper Churn Creek Schoolhouse had once served the Hollow community before the state purchased the land. Company 584 built here what would become one of the CCC lakes still visible in the forest today, an impoundment in Nellie Sutton Hollow, whose waters flow into Churn Creek. Built for two purposes: water supply and fire reservoir. The lake was a significant engineering undertaking. The men who built it are documented in photographs that are, in the words of the historian who found them, extraordinarily rare. Their faces survive. Their names are harder to recover. On December 6, 1934, fire broke out at Camp Adams at midday. 180 of the company's men were working in the forest. Only 18 were in camp when the blaze began. A strong wind swept through the Churn Creek Valley, and by the time District Commander Captain Elmer Armstrong arrived from the nearby Camp Gordon on Turkey Creek, he arrived just in time to see all but the administration building consumed. 4 barracks, the kitchen, the mess hall, the recreation building, the powerhouse, the supply building, gone. The fire was ruled suspicious. Within 7 hours of its outbreak, the nearly 200 men of Company 584 had been loaded onto trucks and sent to Fort Knox, Kentucky. They never returned to Shawnee. The cause of the fire was never publicly resolved. The hollow where Camp Adams stood is quiet now, the kind of quiet that asks questions. On Turkey Creek, 2 CCC camps operated in close proximity: Camp Roosevelt and Camp Gordon. In 1934, Company 1545 at Camp Roosevelt undertook the most visible single project of the entire CCC era in Shawnee, the creation of Roosevelt Lake, built by damming McEltree Run and Turkey Creek. A camp inspector writing that year described the view down the Turkey Creek Valley as surely the most wonderful sight that has struck the eyes of the writer for years. The lake the men of Company 1545 built has been at the heart of Shawnee State Park for nearly 90 years. Their names are not on the signs at the water's edge. Life in the camps followed a rhythm that was part military, part school, part community. Reveille at 6 in the morning, workday from 8 to 4, 3 meals a day, hearty ones by the standards of the Depression, in the mess hall. In the evenings, enrollees attended academic classes ranging from basic literacy to forestry science and heavy equipment operation. Religious services were held weekly. Local clergy traveled to the camps on Thursday evenings, and Catholic enrollees were driven by truck to Portsmouth on Sundays. Baseball and football teams played other CCC camps and local town teams, moments when the rigid segregation of daily life gave way to the common language of sport. These young men were building a forest by day. They were building themselves by night. The segregation of the Shawnee CCC camps was not incidental. It was federal policy, imposed and maintained despite consistent protests from the NAACP and civil rights organizations throughout the program's existence. African American enrollees received the same pay and officially the same opportunities as white enrollees in other camps. In practice, the all-black companies were assigned to separate facilities, commanded entirely by white Army officers, and in at least one documented case in Ohio, a proposed campsite was abandoned entirely because the surrounding white community, in the words of CCC Director Robert Fechner, absolutely refused to permit the company to occupy the camp. The men who worked in Shawnee did so knowing that the towns nearby did not want them there. They built the forest anyway. More than 100 miles of all-weather forest roads were constructed by the 4 all-black companies between 1933 and 1942. They follow the ridges and contour lines in the way experienced foresters and Army engineers designed them, built to carry fire trucks, to open the most remote sections of the forest, and to bring visitors to a landscape most Ohioans had never seen. 5 lakes were built in the forest during the CCC era, each one impounding a creek or hollow run to serve as water supply and fire reservoir. Millions of tree seedlings were planted on eroded hillside fields, shortleaf pine on the depleted soil slopes, native hardwoods in the draws. The mixed forest that covers the Shawnee Hills today, oak and hickory on the ridges, tulip poplar and black gum in the hollows, pine on the old field slopes, is partly natural succession and partly the deliberate work of those young men on a hillside, one seedling at a time, in conditions most people would not have chosen. They chose it anyway, or rather, the Depression chose it for them, and they made something of the choosing. In June of 1942, with the nation at war, Congress cut funding for the Civilian Conservation Corps. The camps in Shawnee closed one by one. The men went home or went to war. The forest they had built continued without them. In 1934, even before the CCC had finished its work, 400 acres around Roosevelt Lake had been set aside as a state park, first called Roosevelt State Park, then Portsmouth State Park. And finally, in the early 1970s, Shawnee State Park. When the Ohio Department of Natural Resources was created in 1949, and the recreational facilities formally transferred to the Division of Parks, what was being transferred was infrastructure built almost entirely by African American hands during the worst economic crisis the country had ever known, under conditions of legal segregation, in hollows where they were not always welcome. Today, Shawnee State Forest covers 63,747 acres, the largest state forest in Ohio, one of the most biologically diverse landscapes in the eastern United States. Known as Ohio's Little Smokies, for the blue haze that rises from the canopy on warm mornings, it sustains nearly 8,000 acres of designated wilderness, 46 miles of backpacking trail, and a wildlife population that includes white-tailed deer, wild turkey, black bear, bobcat, and the eastern box turtle. None of this was inevitable. All of it was made by hands that belong to a history the signs and the trail maps have yet to fully tell. Dead Man Hollow is still there, near Twin Creek. The carved marker that the CCC men placed, HT Aug 13, 1824. AD, Dead M, was washed away in a flood, as things in this forest have always been washed away. The identity of HT was never established. The screaming that the old-timers reported hearing in the hollow, that too has no explanation on record. What remains is the hollow itself, and the creek, and the forest that grew back around the question. In a landscape where so many names have been lost, where the schoolhouses are gone and the hollow communities are gone and the CCC men's names are not on the signs, the unnamed man under the unnamed oak tree is not an anomaly. He is a pattern. This land holds what it is given. It gives back what it can. 4 maps, 3,000 years. The Adena who built the mounds above Brush Creek. The Hopewell who mapped the sky and earthworks. The Shawnee who named every spring and hollow in a language the land still carries. The settlers who cleared and planted and scratched their family names into the geography. The timber companies that stripped it. The young men from Columbus and Cincinnati and Portsmouth who came in 1933 with axes and shovels and built it back. In hollows where the land was already keeping its own counsel, its own dead, its own stories. The forest that stands here now is not empty. It is full. Full of every life that passed through and left something. In the contour of a ridge, in the name on a creek. In the earth that holds what we cannot hold ourselves and gives it back in time to anyone paying close enough attention. Thank you so much for listening to Road of Echoes. If you're watching on YouTube or TikTok, please like, subscribe, follow, and share this episode. Your support helps Road of Echoes grow and keeps these stories alive.